Afternoon, everyone. Okay, welcome everyone, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Affordable Housing Task Force meeting today for September 19, 2022. We do have a published agenda that was on our website, but reflecting back of the funeral today of Queen Elizabeth II, I thought it was probably, we all thought maybe it's appropriate that we take maybe a minute of silence to reflect and think back to all the years of her reign and all the great things that she has done. And so we'll take that minute of silence right now. Thank you. Just before we do move on, does anybody have anything they wish to say about today's funeral or any reflection? Mr. Warden, do you have anything you wish to say? Just being what it is.
Well, I think I would just say that the Queen exemplifies service, right? I mean, many of us here are, elected representatives, and I think we all appreciate what it is to serve. But can you imagine, 2 days before her death, he was still serving, and if that doesn't serve as a model of service, I don't know what else does. But I also reflect on the family. I mean, I was up at 4 o'clock this morning, watching it. I have to confess, I watch the weddings and anything royal. I'm up early, but I reflect on watching family and in their moment when they should be grieving, they're serving, right? I mean, they've got 4 or 5 events per day, and in a very public way, they have to, still do their thing. And isn't that the ultimate in service? They don't get to be like the rest of us. It seems like, we can break down and, take a week off and just, go and paddle a canoe or something. And they don't get to do that. So I'm extremely thankful for Queen Elizabeth. I'm thankful for the royal family and everything that they do in terms of service. And today, my heart, I have to admit, is heavy.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I don't know, it's great words spoken there, and I think we followed a lot of different events. I remember back when Charles, was first married to Princess Di, and then it's just past 25 years when her passing. The end of, I think it was August 31st when she passed, and which was so tragic in itself, right? And you just sort of look at those milestones and that. So thank you for that. Does anybody else have any reflection that they wish to share? Or certainly we're going to today's, as you said, Mr. Warden, we're up early and watching it, but I'm sure there's going to be opportunity for those that weren't able to see it again, and it'll be in the archives. I think they were even reflecting on back in King George, and also when Queen Elizabeth became queen, and also so that was captured in the archives as well. So for the history of our country and our everyone that's part of it, it's great that that's captured for that. So okay, well, thanks for that time for reflection. Very important. Okay, well, we did have a published agenda that was on our website. To the members here, are there any declaration of pecuniary interest with members with the items on their agenda? All right, I see none. So just before we go on, we have quorum. Sarah, I think, oh wait, now, Councillor Soever, he resigned from this committee, did he not? Right. Are we missing anybody else?
No,
we're all here.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure we didn't miss anybody. Okay, so moving on then, there are no delegations for today's meeting. Now moving on to item 4, planning and development. There is a motion there that wish to be put on the floor. Would somebody care to move that motion? Councillor Keaveney and Councillor Burley. Okay, and we're gonna pass this over to Liz, and I know we do have Randy here with the big guns, and so do we have Scott. So we got the heavy duty ones here as well. So Liz, I'll pass it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Just really quickly, a housekeeping item. I just wanted to confirm with Sarah or Tara that there was a presentation linked there. Just wanted to confirm if you would control slides or if I need to control slides.
We can do whatever you like.
Okay. Would you mind controlling them if I just give you the nod? And please feel free to put up the presentation at this point in time as well. That would be great.
Just give us one moment, please.
Sure thing. Yeah, right on the spot. Sorry. So I'm really thankful for the opportunity to spend some time again today talking about some of the data work that we've been doing since the release of the household income statistics by Census Canada back in July. And so once we get the presentation up there, I can give you a brief rundown. I did prepare speaking notes today. I think you may have gleaned from our past 2 times chatting together that I can be a little bit wordy in my description. So I will try to keep it brief. My intention today is to really just kind of walk through the data tables that were included within the staff report, and then to spend a little bit of time discussing the schematic that was provided at the end of the report, which is kind of the pull it all together, where do we go from here type of diagram as well. And so I think you will find that there's a lot of numbers included within the report. I'm hoping that our discussion will help to kind of focus around the meaning of what those numbers really get at when we consider them all together with some of the other information that we have on hand as well.
I just have it here, Liz. My apologies.
Yeah, no worries. Perfect. Okay, if you want to flip ahead to the next slide, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so today my intention is that we'll start with a really brief chat regarding data literacy, and then we'll talk through some of the information that was provided within the staff report that went out within the agenda package. And like I mentioned, that will be primarily focusing around those data tables so that we're all kind of comfortable with where those figures came from, and we have an understanding of where we can rely on those numbers and perhaps where we cannot. In addition to that, we'll talk a little bit about the meaning making section of the report and that summary schematic provided at the end of the report. And then a few quick discussion items around kind of next steps or where we think we're headed with this surplus lands project in particular. I think there's 2 kind of priority or key goals of the presentation and the report today. First and foremost, to inform. So to share, what the data appears to be telling us at this point in time. And then we would also provide a little bit more of a nuanced framework to help us structure our further discussions around affordable housing needs and interventions. I think up until this point, we've really had kind of the high level provincial policy statement definition of affordability. And it's good. It allows us to do kind of apples to apples comparisons with other areas based on those informations, and historically over time we can compare as well. The problem is that kind of catches the top of the 60th percentile of incomes. And so I think we've all been maybe looking for a way to dive in a more nuanced way to look at what is actually happening below that 60th percentile income. Next slide, please. So briefly on data literacy, I think my alma mater might revoke my credentials if I do not cover off the important considerations around using statistics. So I think really important to acknowledge the fact that when we're talking anything to do with data and presenting statistics, it's important that we start with good quality information. We want that to be of good quality. We also, in order to rely on that information, we need to understand the assumptions and limitations that go along with the data that's used. And we need to use that information also in an ethical way. So we're not using that to mislead. We're being very transparent in the way that we're presenting that information. And we're not using it in any way that could cause harm to the populations that data is describing. You'll hear me refer to a number of different descriptive terms in my presentation today. In the key one there to keep in mind is the distinction between average and median values. So median values in a data set reflect that midpoint where half of the values are above and half of the values are below. And I think in the context of affordable housing, where we're talking about price points or income levels, median is the more robust measurement metric as opposed to averages, which can be skewed by large data numbers kind of at the top of the range or at the bottom of the range. And so it may not be the most representative value. So we'll talk a lot about median values. The other thing that I wanted to mention about data literacy is that when we're sharing information around kind of data and statistics, we're doing so by providing you with a narrative. And so there is an element of framing that happens. We're presenting the data to tell a story. It's not meant to be inauthentic in any way. It's really just meant to allow us to put those data in the context of why and how they're important. And so I'll come back to that and speak a little bit to the framing as we go through some of those data tables as well. And then finally, I just wanted to note that Statistics Canada does have a whole suite of training and education materials available on their website relating to data literacy. And so if that's something that you're interested in, if you don't have a lot of experience dealing with figures and the data tables like have been included within the report, please feel free to check that out. It's a really neat resource, and they've got videos and fact sheets and all different types of sources of information to share about how to properly use data and statistics. Next slide, please. So before we get into the data tables, I just wanted to speak just briefly to the methods or approach that we've used in assessing some of the income data. So as I mentioned, we're looking for a slightly more nuanced way to present that household income information so that it'll be useful for targeted interventions. And we came across the Housing Research Collaborative and their prototype report that was completed for Kelowna in 2021. And this model is really meant to use readily available StatsCan data that's produced every census period to allow for the development of housing need by income grouping information. So there's a number of different steps that can occur. It goes a little bit deeper, each additional data source that you bring into the mix. We've started off with just looking at the housing need by income grouping, but as additional information is released through the census program over the course of this year, we should be able to add in some additional information to target in around the supply side needs. So in terms of sizing and number of households at each income level. This model also includes a land assessment tool, so similar to the GIS tool that we've been working on through the Surplus Lands project. And it includes kind of like a heat map approach, I guess, where it takes a number of criteria and ranks sites based on those criteria, which kind of gives you a number 1 site versus a number 5 or number 10 site, depending on the scale you're using for potential siting of new affordable housing projects. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's where my notes are going to help us. So diving into the report, we'll start just right at the beginning with table 1. And this table outlines the household and individual incomes for those communities within Grey County and for the county overall. Across on that regional basis, the median household income is identified at $78,000, but there is a range within those median values for different communities within the county. So Owen Sound, for example, having the lower median household income of $63,000, and Town of the Blue Mountains with a median income of $101,000. If you take a look at the averages there, again, you can kind of get a sense that there may be some skewing happening either by high incomes, for example, in the case of Town of the Mountains, where that average is quite a bit higher than the median income. Next slide, please.
So Liz, just on that,
Sure.
I did quick math. If you take 52,000, that's 1,000 a week at 40 hours is 25 bucks an hour. Just that
Quick back of the envelope math. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And you make a great point, and we'll loop back to that. One of the kind of next steps that we've talked about is, do we need to perhaps talk with our partners in the community around that living wage recalculation to
Right.
see kind of where we're at. Yep. Okay, thank you. So what we've done in table 2 is we've taken that $78,000 median household income for the county at that regional basis, and we've cut it up into categories based on the percentage of the median income. And this is based on international research and a national survey that was completed as part of that HEART model that was developed by UBC. And this splits down our income groupings into very low income, low, moderate, average, and high income classifications. And we've included here in the middle column the upper limit threshold of dollar values in terms of household income that would correspond to. And there is a little bit of rounding that happens there. We take that 20% of 78,000 and we round it to the nearest income category that's included in the StatsCan information. The benefit there is that we get to correlate that with the number of households within each of those categories. So for example, in that very low income category, that would capture households up to $15,000 household income before tax. And we've got 1,200 approximately households within that income grouping within the county. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. The second part of this, and as shown in table 3, is that we then take those income thresholds and we calculate a maximum affordable housing cost for each of those income groupings. Now, we haven't just straight taken a 30% as 30% tends to be the magic number when we're talking about affordability, 30% of gross household income. But in this case, as outlined within the HEART model, it's recommended that we make some assumptions around the capacity to pay for housing in those lower 2 income groupings. For the very low income grouping, these households are traditionally or typically, I guess we could expect them to be funded through some kind of income support program. And so generally the recommendation within the model is that we cap out that maximum affordability at the shelter rate for income support. So the $390 that's in there reflects the Ontario Works shelter rate through those benefits. For the low income households, folks up to $40,000 a year, the suggestion within the HEART model is that we actually cap that at the maximum of 30% of a full-time minimum wage worker. So what we essentially did is check minimum wage, multiplied that by 40 hours a week, 52 hours or 52 weeks a year. And then we backed that out to try and figure out what a 30% would be based on that income. And so that's what $780 a month there for that grouping. One of the things that we noted within the report is simply that there is a planned increase to the minimum wage on October 1st, up to $15.50 an hour. And so that $780 would increase to $806 when we calculate for that increase in wages. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we calculated out our various income groupings, but we wanted to understand how that relates to the actual price of housing locally. And so we did some additional work to try and understand what the available market rents and ownership costs would look like for somebody trying to enter into those types of housing. Back in March and again in May, and then just as recently as 2 weeks ago, Becky, our planner within our department, has taken a snapshot view based on Facebook Marketplace as well as Kijiji rental listings, and we tried to gather some statistics around what the price points are for those available units. I'd say this is not the most super scientific process, really was a scan, I guess, a scan type of view. But what we determined through that is that there are available market rental listings. They're spread out across the county. Generally, they're kind of in the $1,000 a month or more price point for those units. There is a trend of increasing prices with increasing unit sizes. And on average, all factored in together, we'd be looking in and around an $1,800 to $1,900 a month like rental cost for those available market units. I think one of the things I think is important to mention here is that those generally don't include utility costs. More than 70% of the listings would tack on the utility costs in excess of the rental price. One of the things I just wanted to include is that Becky had provided me with some comments just based on the most recent snapshot view that she's looked through, which those figures aren't reflected in the table here. What she advised is that based on that additional snapshot, it doesn't appear that the pricing has come down in any way. We're still hitting kind of that same average price point. She noted that of those single detached townhouses, semi-detached dwellings, many of the ones that were listed actually appear to be new construction, so they haven't been previously occupied. So we were talking and wondering a little bit around what that indicates perhaps regarding investors acquiring those units for rental purposes versus owner-occupied acquisition of those new units. She also noted that many of the listings have now added a requirement for a Nesterly application, and that's a paid screening service that requires an applicant for a rental unit to put in their credit history and income information and prior addresses and that kind of thing so they can be screened. And so one of the things we were thinking about there is that, certainly from a landlord perspective, it's important that they have an understanding of who they're renting their units to and that they're satisfied that that will be a good relationship. But I think we may just want to caution that that could also present a barrier to certain populations in accessing those available units. And so whether you have a not great credit history or no credit history, if you're young or perhaps new to the country, that might present a barrier, as well as being an online tool, there may be some technological barrier there as well for seniors or others who are not familiar with that approach. I think finally, the last thing I would note just on this slide in this snapshot view is that so many of the units identify that they are best suited to professional couples or retirees. And so I think we just want to make sure that we're also ensuring that there are places that are tailored and targeted towards folks with families. So children also need places to live. Next slide, please. We wanted to understand the same on the ownership side as well. And so we took a look at the Real Estate Association websites. They keep ongoing market statistics and provide year-to-date stats as well as kind of month-by-month snapshot view of their sales data. Looking at July 2022, we looked at both the Grey Bruce Owen Sound Real Estate Association as well as the Lakelands Association stats, and have determined that within those two market areas, a median dwelling that is being sold is going for $608,000 in the Braggos area and $750,000 in the Lakelands West. And so if we think back, median is kind of that right midpoint. So half of the listings would be pricier and half of the sales would be less expensive. Next slide, please. We took those figures around median household prices and tried to apply general mortgage stats to that to figure out what would a payment be if someone were entering in that type of dwelling. And so follow with me here. If the median price is $608,000, there would be a down payment cost that goes with that. There would be default premiums, so CMHC default premiums required. And that we estimated that would yield a mortgage payment of $3,500 approximately a month for that median priced household. If that mortgage payment was 30% of that household's income, so if it was affordable to that household based on that definition, a gross annual household income of close to $142,000 would be required. And then likewise in the Lakelands West, $173,000 in order to support that mortgage payment at an affordable rate. And I think I definitely had sticker shock looking at these numbers. I I think I'll just speak here as well to framing again. So clearly, if you increase the down payment, the monthly payment is going to come down in those mortgage calculations. But because we're looking at this information through the lens of, people moving into kind of a different type of housing or accessing that housing where they're not already in an ownership scenario, we chose that minimum down payment just to give us an idea of what is that barrier to entry so that we could better understand how that would apply.
Quick question, Liz, or just on your
Sure.
math. So 608, you had 6%. So 6% is your minimum down payment for CMHA or whatever it is, mortgage insurance or whatever it is, right? Is that right?
Yeah, the 6%. So there's a minimum requirement for 5% down payment on any price. I think it's $250,000. No, sorry, $500,000 or below. $500,000 or below, you have to give 5% of that, and then it's 10% of anything above and beyond that.
So if somebody put more of a down payment down, that default premiums would change as well, right?
That's right. Yeah. So you'd be, so the standard mortgage would be a 20% down payment, and at a 20% down payment, then you wouldn't have the default premiums factored in as well.
Yeah. And I don't know if that note needs to be there, but it really is ratcheting up the person that doesn't have, but there's more to pay too, in a way.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I think about, if you're in an existing market rental, for example, and you're thinking about home ownership as your next step, the affordability of the market rental that you're in and your household income and family resources are really going to shape whether or not a large down payment is possible for your family, right? And so I've chosen the minimum here just for that illustration. I suspect that mortgage brokers everywhere would be recommending a higher down payment to try and minimize some of those default premium costs as well. But that's the minimum. So if you're stretching to make it into that ownership housing, that may be the cost. Certainly there are listings below the median price point. I think that's the other clarification I want to make. I'm not suggesting that there are no homes available below that $608,000 price point. But I think if you do take a look at the listings that are available right now on the MLS, much of what is there below the median are kind of the older, smaller, and condo units. And so, they may not be as efficient in terms of utility costs, heating, ventilation, water fixtures, that kind of thing. There's the handyman's 1980 or 1890 special in some areas. And then with the condo tenure, you oftentimes have condominium fees that are a fixed expense in addition to that. So, just trying to kind of, we've picked this as the minimum barrier to entry. There's certainly other units available, but from an affordability standpoint, I'm not sure that a lower than median price point necessarily gets you so far ahead in terms of affordability, just because you're factoring in all of those other considerations.
So just one other comment, if you
Sure.
were trying to fall into that 18 or 1900 range that you talked about earlier on,
Mhm.
you almost have to buy something for $400,000 less to get into that same 18 to 1900 affordability.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think one of the things that will help us is once we do get the decile data from StatsCan to allow us to calculate that top of the 60th percentile household income, we'll be able to figure out what a maximum affordable mortgage or rent would be for that household. And so that will give us an additional understanding of kind of the ability to pay and how that relates to the units we're creating, whether people can access them or not. Next slide, please.
Thank you.
So in the meaning making section of the report, we did tie in some additional information to help describe the situation. So one of the things that we pulled in there was the waitlist information. And so in discussing with Brad Noble, our data specialist, we understand that this has been steadily increasing. The waitlist has been increasing over the course of the pandemic, and even up 381 eligible applicants between April and August of this year. So we've got 2,327 applicants on our affordable housing waitlist. The other factor that we brought in is looking at core housing need. And so within the census data, they do provide us a breakdown of those households that would be in inadequate or unaffordable housing. And so in 2016, that number was 4,190 households for the county overall. And the primary driver of that mismatch with their housing was affordability, as opposed to condition or sizing, for example. And then the final matter that we pulled in for consideration within that meaning-making section was that the Smart Prosperity Institute report, and I think that's University of Ottawa, they had gone about trying to kind of truth the claim that Ontario needs 1.5 million homes within the next 10 years. And so they went in and took a different approach to their calculations than underpinned the original by the province. And what they found is that, yes, indeed, we do need that volume of housing creation. And one of the things that they had factored into their assessment is suppressed household formation. And so what they've identified for Grey County is that there are approximately 2,000 households that they think could have formed, but have not formed as a result of a lack of availability of units at the right price point or the right size for that family unit to establish. Next slide, please. So pulling it all together, unfortunately, this is the limit of my graphic design capability, but when we go out, I think to use this for discussion, perhaps communications can help me make it a little more beautiful. But I think I'll just kind of walk through the components of the schematic and we can talk a little bit about that. So along the top, we've got those household income thresholds. So 15,000 corresponding to that very low income group, 40,000 low income, and so on. We've also along the top included that maximum affordable price for each of those income groupings. Along the bottom, we've included the number of households that fall within each of the income groupings, and the width of each of those categories is scaled based on the number of households that fall within those groupings. And then we've got those income grouping titles, so very low, low, moderate, average, and high along the bottom. And then what we've done is we've placed on different types of housing and price points of housing, trying to kind of fit them in where they work for those households. So if we start off at the left-hand side, for those folks that are in that very low income group, we've got that deeply affordable housing. So that's provided by the county and by nonprofit partners. Perhaps those folks are living in market rentals, but with a market or with a portable rent subsidy. Some of those folks may be occupying emergency shelter or be without housing at this point in time. If we're looking up into that into the low, that was very low, into the low grouping, again, those folks are potentially within some of those supported or subsidized housing scenarios based on what they can afford. But we do know that the market rentals that are currently occupied across the county have a median price of somewhere around $950 a month, and that's based on CMHC data. And so presumably some of those folks below the $40,000 income level would occupy some of those units as well. I think also in here, I'm not suggesting that all 7,620 households within that low income grouping are in core housing need. Presumably somewhere within that data set, we've got the very frugal elderly couple who've got a paid off house and are taking kind of minimum drawdowns from their retirement savings for their lifestyle. So I just want to caution against that. We're not saying that everybody in that category is in core housing need, but looking at it from that perspective of what can the households afford to pay, that's really kind of the lens that we've applied here. We do have market rental current listings, and as we discussed, that price point is in around kind of that $1,850 a month. And so presumably we've got folks in current occupied market rental units, and then we've got these listings that are available as well that would present what's available for people to move into. And then there's the below median ownership. And we understand from our calculations here that that probably really at this point is applying to those folks in that high income category. And above median ownership would be in the perhaps very high income category that we haven't defined that separately, but it's all lumped in there together with high. So if we look at this from a movement standpoint, I think that's really where some of the value of this schematic comes in place. So, if we think about ourselves occupying a market rental, and then, our spouse passes or we lose a job, what housing options are available to us if we've had a hit to our household income. Likewise, if we're in a market rental and looking to move for a job, we're then leaving a unit that might be affordable to us right now, but we need to see what's available on the market. We can only access those units. And so we're talking perhaps a difference of $1,000 or more a month between what someone might be paying in an occupied unit and what would be available on the market for them to rent. And so I think, when we look at it in this way, we can kind of target in a little bit around the bottlenecks to flow between the various types of housing and affordability price points in the housing system. And I think likewise, we can start to think about interventions that we might make at those bottlenecks or at those different income levels. And so along the bottom there, we've identified, employee housing, rooming houses, and additional dwelling units or additional residential units. And the thought there is that, those types of housing could be developed and be targeted towards trying to kind of capture some of those bottlenecks. So from an employment flow perspective, are we creating then affordable employee housing that matches the incomes that those households are receiving through their employment? Not necessarily then relying on the market rental listings to accommodate those folks where we need those households and those people to be located. And additionally, for additional dwelling units, presumably, if somebody wants to move into the ownership market, if it was really easy to make an additional dwelling unit, if that was a really streamlined process, perhaps that provides an opportunity for a household to buy, to create an ADU, and then that helps with their own mortgage as well as providing affordable housing for someone else. And so I've got a couple of icons just at the bottom of that slide: people, tools, money. And so my thought is that, in a go forward situation, we could be looking at this kind of chart and these different bottlenecks to flow between the different price points and try and think about, who can be empowered to create housing that's available to those price points. What tools do we have available, and what financial resources can we pull in to that mix? And so I think that's where some of our future work will be, is trying to kind of target some of the interventions to really hit those price points that we've got a full range of supply across the various price points. Next slide, please. Okay, and so this is the last one. We've made it. So just thinking forward in terms of the surplus lands project and some of the data work as well. We do have that special data order in with StatsCan. We're just waiting for that decile information to do those provincial policy statement calculations of affordability. We have, as staff, begun some in-house pilot site assessments for affordable housing. We've chosen a couple of county-owned lands to start with, just to kind of truth our process to make sure that we've got a good flow to that process of reviewing for suitability for affordable housing creation. We'll be working with communications to roll out some key messaging as we had discussed last time, and we'll update that together with some of this data that helps us target in around maybe where we need to direct our key messages and the types of information we need to share. We'll be pursuing some county and local staff discussions regarding this data report and those targeted interventions, and then also trying to glean an understanding of any kind of local surplus lands that perhaps may be well suited for affordable housing creation. We'll refine our GIS tool, have all of those ongoing networking conversations with the various other partners working within the housing system. And then I think there is also an opportunity following the election. Generally, there is kind of council training and education provided to county council and to the municipal councils. And so perhaps we'll be able to tag in with some of that to provide some good foundational information for these next councils to be working on the issue of affordable housing creation. Yeah, so I think that's probably as much as I need to say at this point. I'm happy to discuss questions or to wax poetic a little bit in terms of where we want to go with this. But I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you. And I think, especially looking at that waitlist data, I think we are really, at this point where these targeted interventions are going to be necessary. And so looking forward to that work.
Well, thanks, Liz. And just one other comment before I go and open it up for questions is we are hearing situations where apartment buildings or units are being sold and then they're being, they have to move out and then they're finding that to find a replacement, it's like double. You hear that across the province, which is making it hard on people as well and stuff like that. But that's just as a side. So, well, thank you for that presentation. A lot of information there, a lot of stuff that some of us might have some knowledge on, but it's certainly seeing from the stats and how things are at the current time really gives it a snapshot at this moment in time to know what's going on for sure.
Yep.
Okay, questions from committee members. Come on, there's got to be some questions out there. Go ahead, Councillor Chili. Councillor Keaveney, I should say. Councillor Keaveney.
Thank you very much, Chair McQueen. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Liz, for that really detailed, interesting report. Lots of comments and questions for sure, but I'll just ask you a couple if I may to get started. How do we use this information that you presented to us today to attack the issue of NIMBYism and to help turn people around into being YIMBYs, to help educate our public on the need to support the county and our lower tiers, each of us, as we go forward to try to create affordable housing projects?
Great question, Liz.
Yes, thank you very much. So that is a big question. And so how do we use this information? So I think to some degree, it reads as a little bit of an aha for me and for those I've shared the information with as we've been working through the report. What I mean by that is that, we certainly have broad awareness in our communities that affordable housing is a hot topic. And I think we've got lots of anecdotal evidence and lots of stories kind of floating around about the challenges people are facing in achieving the housing. But I think if we break it down and are communicating with people around those household incomes, I feel like it really kind of hits home because you can compare yourself within that spectrum. Whereas before, we've been talking about, well, we need to get it affordable, and that's, it should be affordable 30% of your household income. That's very abstract. And so my thinking is that by providing a more targeted or nuanced view of those affordability thresholds, we can communicate with people a lot more clearly around what hardship others in their community might be facing and really put some numbers to that. And so I think that's one of the elements of NIMBY is an awareness thing. I don't think there's a whole lot of need for general awareness building. I think most people are pretty sure that affordable housing is an important issue to address right now, and it's definitely kind of on the election platforms and that kind of thing. Certainly is lots of discussion. But I do think that targeted piece and that thinking about how do we communicate the actual needs, I think will be helped through this type of data report. And I think also, NIMBY has to do with kind of a reaction to change where we don't have control over issues. And I kind of feel like there's the potential perhaps to shift the mindset a little bit from the idea that we're imposing change or development on communities for some random future neighbor, and instead communicate that we're imposing change on communities to accommodate those within our community already. I think that we oftentimes compare ourselves upwards to the lifestyles of the rich and famous, but we don't spend a whole lot of time looking around at where we are in our communities relative to the people who live around us, to the people who put the coffee in your hand or, process your grocery order or clean your teeth at the dentist. Like we have to put some faces, I think, to the affordability challenge so that people are understanding that it's not affecting some random stranger. It's affecting our community, and it's a really important consideration for community sustainability. All of those lifestyle factors can't be achieved if we aren't accommodating for all of those income ranges in our communities. And so I think if we tie this data with that interdependence piece and that understanding that we really are part of this interdependent community, I feel like maybe that kind of helps head us off in the right direction for the communications that we're making around development and why it's necessary.
Shirley, do you have follow-up to that?
Thanks very much, Chair McQueen. Yes, Liz, and thank you for that. And I like your approach of tying it to the business community because all fresh in my mind, we just had data from the Fort County Labor Market Planning Board this afternoon that the unemployment rate for August was 3.8% in this region. So that's a pretty low and scary number. So I think there's definitely room to tie the housing and that data from their perspective together. One last question for you, if I may, and I think you and I did touch on this in another conversation. Again, rolling this data out to developers and creating that toolkit that will support anyone who is interested in helping us solve this problem with all of the available incentives and so on. And looking forward to that, as I imagine you'll create as you work on those pilot projects. So just want to say great work, Liz, and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Shirley. And just to interject there, we know we're at the level of prices today. It would be interesting if you took what pre-COVID numbers were, because just listening to the business report just last week, numbers are starting to trickle down a little bit, maybe more to Southern Ontario. I just wonder, you know, we saw COVID took a big jump. I just wondered if what would it would be like today if we were pre-COVID numbers, and just something to put back on. Yeah, because you know, we have seen you know, we've all seen it on that, and just in the sense of affordability, I've heard it all said where it said, how's our kids going to afford? So the NIMBYism is right in our families. How is our kids, how's the new generation or our seniors going to, you know, it's right there. It's not like it's an ugly thing. It's all around us. So that's the good part. So other questions, comments? Mr. Warden, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really interested in the median household incomes chart. And I look at Hanover and Owen Sound being at the bottom. And could you help us to understand why it is that our two primary settlement areas have the lowest median household incomes?
Thank you. Happy to tackle or to try to tackle that one. So I think there's probably lots of causes associated with that. I think housing form is one of the considerations, is that you do have some of that historic or denser housing within those primary settlement areas that may kind of go for the lower price point, which then facilitates the people to occupy those units that are perhaps then able to work in those industries that pay at those price points. I don't know exactly the mechanics there of chicken and egg, to be honest, in terms of how you kind of, which one precedes the other. But I know that, you know, when we're looking at Owen Sound, for example, we do have the potential, I suppose, to create additional affordable housing in those locations, not necessarily on a causal basis, because it's more a response, like responding to the fact that there is a lower median household income there. We have the opportunity potentially to create units within that community to target more so that to that lower price point. And I think the other thing that goes with that is that, you know, affordable housing units just can't be plunked anywhere and be expected to be successful. They're definitely, especially around those deeply affordable units, I think there's the requirement that you have some supportive services that go alongside with that. And so a community like Owen Sound, for example, that has that full range of services and all of those service providers, that may make sense in terms of where those new, you know, deeply affordable units we want to focus them perhaps in those areas with the wraparound services. So not necessarily getting at the mechanics, and I can certainly go away and try and come back with a better answer on the why is it that way. But I think, you know, maybe I've answered the inverse question, which is what can we do with that knowledge? And I think that may present us with that opportunity to try and target those interventions again to meet those lesser household incomes within those communities.
Go ahead, Mr. Warden.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, and I hate to put you on the spot, Randy, but maybe I will. Just going back now to the info that we gathered from the Hanover Owen Sound task force. Is there anything that we learned from that task force that ties into the data that we're seeing coming out here?
Yeah, and I think Liz touched on this in terms of part of her response in terms of, you know, why we see some of the say the median household incomes a bit lower in those communities is likely the result of majority of our rental housing stock is within those communities currently. So within Owen Sound and Hanover. And as Liz pointed out, the support services that folks rely on are within some of those communities as well. And so, you know, if you're making decisions in terms of can I afford transportation or can I afford housing, being close to those services and not having to rely on, say, a vehicle to get to those service locations is likely a result of why folks then reside in those communities where the services are available to them. So I'd have to go back and look at some other information from that Hanover Owen Sound Task Force report to see if there's some other insights that were drawn from that that tie into this new information. And we'd be happy to look into that further and follow up. I think the key is you know, having this data and information just provides a different perspective, I guess, on this data. As Liz indicated, that having those previous PPS definitions of the affordability sets that maximum threshold and doesn't get at the crux of, you know, what about the incomes that are below that maximum threshold, and making sure then that we have housing options and that we're targeting those options in order to address the needs across the housing spectrum. And as you can see, the housing spectrum, when you look at it from an income perspective, is quite vast. So making sure then, as going back to Liz's people, tools and financial resources and incentives, making sure that we're targeting those in order to address the housing spectrum and likely those areas that are most in need. So that's I think what's been quite helpful from my perspective anyways, of looking at this through that heart lens and being able to see the different income brackets across our communities, and then making sure that we have the tools and resources to be able to address those housing needs across that spectrum.
Warden, do you have a follow-up?
Last, thank you for that, by the way, Randy. So this report is about sort of an update on surplus lands. And it's excellent information in the report, by the way. But what am I supposed to take from this data as it pertains to surplus lands?
So I can respond to that. So I think the main takeaway here is that we're going to have to be really, really selective with how we use those surplus lands, because I think, you know, we don't have lots and lots of surplus lands all over. You know, each municipality probably has a handful that might be suitable for some kind of redevelopment. And we've been developing the process map and screening tools to kind of go through and do that assessment to determine where those properties might be viable. But what we're hearing is with inflation, with interest rates and the construction costs and everything right now, even some of those projects that had free land and CMHC grants are being found to be non-viable. Just because of the changing costs associated with those projects. And so I think on a go forward, as we're considering and screening those surplus lands, we may really want to kind of evaluate them from the perspective of that deeply affordable housing, and whether that's county initiated or perhaps more likely nonprofit partners maybe undertaking those projects. You know, we're going to need to keep in mind that there is a priority that will have to happen, because we could foreseeably at some point in time in the future find ourselves in a situation where creating deeply affordable housing is non-viable altogether. And so I think the idea that we've got, these lands that potentially can help with that math in those pro forma, that is a finite resource, and so we'll need to be quite selective in how we use them. The other thing that I might just mention, if okay with you, is that I think it's challenging, and County Council is certainly the right group, I think, to target this comment to, in that, I think each municipality is really hoping to try and find a meaningful way to address the affordability issues in their community. But I think one of the things that this report highlights is that, the affordability problem is not necessarily equally distributed throughout the various communities. And so when we're talking about how we proceed with projects, and whether that's on surplus lands or otherwise, I think we'll probably need to get our heads around how we equitably kind of share the wins across all of those different organizations. And so I think, regionally, we look at those numbers regionally, we're trying to understand, as an area of commerce and of business and of living, how do we function as a whole? And so I think there will need to be a bit of a mindset shift in that, it's not necessarily each individual council looking at all of the tools and all of the options to address affordable housing, but it may just be that certain areas need to focus in on different solutions, and that those wins in, maybe it's accessory units or employee housing in one area, and maybe it's deeply affordable subsidized units in another. It's that regional perspective, I think, that is going to be very important because of that need to match the services with the units, and to accommodate those where the prices of land will allow that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Go ahead, Councillor O'Leary. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Chair, and through you to Liz. I just wanted to ask, we have a breakdown on just about everything. Do we have a breakdown on the 2,300 families? I don't know if that's the right question. Is there anything we can learn from the families that are there? Is there sisters and mothers from the same family that count for three? Could we put two families together and get them off of the list? Is there single mothers there that are getting no money or no income from their exes? And is there other areas that we can attack within this list or within the breakdown to get people off of that list? I don't know if I'm making sense, but do we have a breakdown on the 2,300?
I see Anne Marie has her hand up. Go ahead, Liz.
Okay, so I would defer. Anne Marie, did you want to address that one? I think you're more familiar with the
I just
list.
wanted to talk actually about the number of 23. That must be individual people and children all on our list, because our list is actually 1,500 households at this point, and that is from all of Ontario. So that doesn't necessarily, there's probably about 75% of that are actually from Grey County. So there are breakdowns that we can do for that. So I'm just looking at that number. I'm not sure where Brad got that number from, but I'm thinking that it must have been individual people that came up on that instead of households. So that's something that we can look at. And we do have a breakdown of who wants housing where, and how many are families, how many require a 3-bedroom, a 4-bedroom, that sort of thing. And we do work with people to try and figure out, but until a housing unit comes up, we don't really delve into what is their personal situation. And that's where I think when we're looking at what we're going to talk about next, about some of our most vulnerable with our coordinated access system, and that's where we're assigning caseworkers to people that are struggling with homelessness, so that we can dive into, is there somewhere else that is there a family member you can live with? Is there, some money that we can get to you? So that will help some of our most vulnerable, but certainly something that we could look at, reaching out. I mean, we do talk to everybody on our wait list at least twice a year, but maybe there's some more in-depth conversations to be had there for sure.
Thank you for that, Marie. Go ahead, Councillor O'Leary.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So Anne Marie, is it, would we be better off to dive into this and see what we find out? Like, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I just mean that there might be some things we can find out here that we can go at from a different angle to try and tackle this. There must be something.
Yeah, and not a lot of people on our wait list are homeless, right? Not everybody on that wait list doesn't have somewhere. They've got somewhere that's probably just not completely affordable for them, right? So we have to keep that in mind too. So there's some people on the wait list that maybe are looking towards downsizing into an apartment, and that's a smaller apartment. We've got a lot of variations on there. Our most vulnerable are the people that we're working with on that coordinated access list. And that is around our 150 people right now that we are diving into and that we are trying to figure out how we can help. There's that inflow and outflow too. We might help get 10 people out and then 10 more people end up on our list. So it's definitely looking at that inflow and outflow. A lot of the families and a lot of the people that are on our wait list do have somewhere to go, but again, they're just struggling with affordability right now. So, they put their name on the list because this might be might be more beneficial for them. But certainly we can do deeper dives into some of them. Most people that are on our list, we do connect with, we refer to services, we, try and provide them as much information as we can while they're waiting for somewhere to come about. We do ensure that, they're on the right, if they have not done a tax return, we get them to a free clinic to do that tax return so they can get that money that might be owed to them to assist while they wait. Those are the things that we are doing, but it is that most vulnerable that we really need to narrow in on, and that's why we're switching into a different housing first with support system.
Okay, and just finally, Mr. Chair, if I could, so just to be clear, the number we're dealing with is 150 then in Grey County?
That we know of, and that changes daily, right? So there might be somebody, again, coming in and out of our list, but we have about 150 people that experience some sort of homelessness on and off, or are completely, chronic homelessness for more than 6 months. So that is that 150 that we're working hard to get some supports. We do require a lot of housing that we don't have available here, like 24/7 supportive housing with mental health supports, addiction supports. That's the housing that we're missing. That's that missing link right now in order for us to put an end to chronic homelessness. 14th Street right now is going to be a good project for us, a good, pilot project, I guess would be the word. And we are able to provide the bricks and mortar, and CMHC is looking to provide the supports, but we need a lot more housing with supports. We have a number of people on our list right now that we've housed many times, but because there aren't the supports to help them remain housed, they end up back on the street. So those supports are very, very important.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And just following up on that, so certain programs, if it's government funded programs, the revenue or the income goes directly to the landlord, right? There's a mechanism so then it doesn't get spent somewhere else. It goes directly through it on certain circumstances, correct?
There are some portable housing benefits that are available to people that do go directly to a landlord to assist with the rents, but they don't cover the full % of the rents. But the province has actually enhanced that program over the last couple of years, and we've been able to access it. The application goes directly to the province, so we help the person apply to the province. And of course, we have a wait list for that program, but it has been very beneficial for a lot of people. And some of those people are still waiting on our wait list, right? So when they get into our housing, then that benefit could go to somebody else. But certainly, yes, it's been beneficial.
I was just picking up on your part of people come in and out, and I wasn't sure if that fund was there and then it's gone and then it's gone somewhere else.
No, a lot of it has to do with mental health, that just maybe for whatever reason they're unable to keep themselves housed, whether it's with conflicts with neighbors or they're not paying their rent. Or, addictions, mental health, that just maybe the supports aren't there in order to help them with their daily living needs. And that's where we need that 24/7 housing.
It's a good question on that list. are you finding opportunities or people entertaining the idea of buying a property together with somebody else just to get a roof over their head? Is that, I've heard some stories about that.
Not on this list. I mean, we're dealing with the most vulnerable. So a lot of
Yeah.
the people that are on Ontario Work, so they're getting $700 a month to live on. And so there's not that opportunity, that financial opportunity.
But going back to where there's numbers of people that can't afford, are you finding that though, as people being like entertaining that idea of buying a place to make it affordable? Like,
No one that we work with could afford to buy a house. We are mandated to work with our very low income on that chart that Liz showed. And so no one would have enough money to buy even, 3 or 4 people probably would be a difficult for them to do. And a lot of banks won't offer a mortgage to somebody that's on ODSP or OW. So they're rental and they're looking for that rental, but we do have some people that are, going together to look at a rental house. So there might be 2 people looking at a 2-bedroom or even sometimes a 1-bedroom in order to afford it. So we are seeing that a bit.
cohabitating.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Burley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to apologize. My northern Georgian Bluffs internet keeps cutting out, so I may disappear and I may not, but I don't want to miss this great conversation. So if I do disappear, I will try to get back on. Thanks.
Well, we're talking about in and out, so you might be one of those in and out coming and going. So far, so great. Okay, Scott, you got a comment there. Thanks for that update, Councillor Burley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair McQueen and members of the task force. I just wanted to circle back and first off to say thank you to Liz and Brad and Becky for all the work they've done in terms of gathering this data. And Randy and Anne-Marie and I got a snapshot of it about a month and a half ago. And I know there was lots of aha moments as Liz described. But I think for me, one of the aha moments, and this is almost circling back to Councillor Keaveney's original question around, what can we do on messaging and NIMBYism and everything else, is that the scope of housing need out there extends far beyond sort of just affordable or not affordable. And even within that affordable, there's such a huge range. If we look at the HART model that Liz has presented in that schematic on the very last page of her presentation, between the very low and even up into the average. And I think if we look at messaging back out to the community and with our incoming councils, if you were to say to somebody, say even five years ago, we've got someone in our community that has a $60,000 a year household income, which I think to many people would be a very, very generous household income, and they're having trouble finding rental housing. And I know we've all got anecdotes and stories from our own communities. There was one being told recently about an OPP officer that had taken a job in this area and quit not that long after because they couldn't find anywhere to live on an OPP salary, which again is what most people would consider a very healthy salary. And then we think about some of the negative stereotypes and stigmas we hear attached to in some cases affordable housing, or if we're at a planning public meeting and people start asking, well, what type of people will this housing attract? And I think we really need to get beyond those discussions and have some frank discussions between our new councils and our staff and our communities, that we're not going to entertain this notion of what kind of people. Simply put, as Liz and Anne-Marie both said, everybody needs a place to live. And if we can frame it back into some of those numbers in terms of, here's what $60,000 a year income will get you in terms of a monthly mortgage payment or a monthly rent. But now you actually have to find somebody that will rent to you for that price. And so I think there's so much here that we can use in terms of that messaging. And as Liz has noted, we'll be working closely with our communications staff on this in terms of how we frame this in terms of a productive discussion going forward, and not trying to sort of combat anything, but work as an integrated community. So I'll stop my rambling now. But again, I want to thank Liz and her team for all their work on this topic.
Especially we live in a climate that we get almost 6 months of winter, which makes it even harder, right? Summertime you can, but wintertime you're, gotta get shelter for sure. Shirley, you got a hand up?
Thanks very much. And I appreciate your comments, Scott, and I just wanted to ask all staff, I guess, in terms of this work that's underway and has been accomplished, and thinking of the federal programs and provincial programs to fund housing projects, do we think this data will help us in those application processes to potentially be successful in acquiring some of those grants? I know Liz mentioned projects are becoming unfeasible for developers because of the increased costs of labor and materials. And do we think that's where the feds in particular will start to pick up the slack, so to speak?
Thanks for the question, Charlotte. Liz or Randy?
Thank you for that question. And I think, yeah, any way we can quantify the need for the type of housing, whatever that we'll be applying for in the future, I think it just helps bolster the application for sure. I can say that I recently was at a conference where a number of county planners from across Ontario get together and talk about common issues, and we're not alone in this topic for sure. This is a matter across the province in terms of people in other counties trying to grapple with the needs across that housing spectrum. And based on the work that Liz and Becky and Brad, I kind of provided a bit of an overview to the group, and they're very interested in seeing some of the information that Liz and Brad and Becky were able to gather together using that HART model, because it helps provide that narrative, helps provide more of that story, as Liz indicated, in terms of what are then the housing needs, and how then, as from looking at from say a planning lens perspective, what tools and policies are we going to require in order to support those different housing needs. And then from the financial resource perspective, going to your question, Councillor Keaveney, what programs or and grant funding programs that we can look to go after to try to tackle some of this, as well as if you know, some of the incentives that the county currently offers and provides to attract more affordable, attainable housing developments, what incentive programs are going to be required in order to make sure, again, that we're addressing and targeting across that housing spectrum, and putting our resources where, in some cases, where they're most required. So that's something that I think we'll be having ongoing conversations with our local municipalities and other organizations to look at opportunities and make sure that we have the tools, the right people, the resources to be able to move forward with tackling some of these affordable housing challenges.
Thanks, Randy. Any other comments there?
Chair McQueen, if I may, and thanks for that, Randy. And one more question. In terms of the surplus lands that the county has, or any of us as municipalities, are any of them being looked at for a tiny home community?
So I can try and address that one. So I'm not aware of anything for a tiny home community at this point in time. I think with the screening tool that I've been trying to put together in terms of all of the steps for assessment of a property, of whether it's suitable or not suitable for an affordable housing project, I think we would probably get to a point where, you know, we've got a locational criteria for the site. You know, are we in proximity to supportive amenities in the community? You know, is the site of sufficient size to get us up above the unit threshold that would be required for grants from the federal government, for example? The actual form of development, I think, would probably come perhaps after the fact, because we would be really generally screening the site to say, okay, you know, does it have that right locational characteristics? Is it of a generally workable size and shape and services, that kind of thing? But I think the actual model for development would come afterwards, and that would be part of the pro forma and for the site in determining is that viable for a particular property. I've heard kind of pros and cons shared around tiny homes. I think certainly there is the opportunity with a tiny home to, they're tiny, they fit in places perhaps where other developments don't. But I think also from a cost of development standpoint, and then kind of the utility standpoint as well. You are creating individual units, and so there are perhaps scales of economy that you may not achieve with a tiny home that you might achieve with an apartment building. So, short answer, we're not screening them specifically for housing type, but longer answer, I think it would have to be part of that overall development pro forma for the site to see if it fits physically and then financially as well for a particular property.
I think Randy might have a comment there as well. Thanks, Liz. Randy?
Yeah, and just further to Liz's comments, I think where there may be more opportunities for tiny home developments are is around those additional residential units, right? So looking at those infill opportunities, or looking at properties where maybe there's a single attached dwelling on that property today. If they have the ability to add an additional dwelling unit, whether it's attached to their property as a tiny home or as a detached structure. And part of that is through the policy updates that are being proposed through OP11 is to ensure that we're allowing those opportunities from a policy perspective, both within the structure, existing dwelling structure, as well as detached structure. So I think that's where we see the most opportunity for trying to incorporate more tiny homes into our communities. And then part of that then is the education and awareness about how folks can just go about navigating through that process, and making sure that, I think Liz touched on this earlier, making sure that process is as easy to follow as possible. So that's as of right permissions, that's looking at here's some companies that already offer some of these products or tiny home designs, so that you can just order a tiny home and access. And there may be some financial tools, again, available for folks to be able to provide and create some of those tiny homes or additional residential units as well. So things like that, to make sure that we're targeting that messaging and providing those avenues for tiny home creation through additional residential units, where we see probably the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to tiny homes.
Shirley, do you have any follow-up to that?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Chair McQueen.
So I want to just pick up on that. So go through OP11, and I brought this up again last week, you can create one inside your home and a detached. But if it was two tiny homes, is there an exception to the rule that would allow two tiny homes on one property because it's unique? And it's just something that I thought is carrying out what Shirley says, is there may be the opportunities there as well, because the home may not work for a basement or above a garage, but they're not a detached home that's equal or smaller than the original, but maybe two tiny homes could be an exception to the rule. Any thoughts, Randy? I see Scott's got his hand up.
Thanks, Chair McQueen. Dealing with three planners today, it's a tough spot. With respect to your question about multiple tiny homes as additional dwelling units, what OP11 is proposing to do is to kind of set the baseline minimums, and so the baseline minimums would be that in most scenarios the county wants to see the permission for at least two additional residential units. That said, municipalities can take those policies and further refine them or further build on them at the municipal level, whether it's in their own municipal official plans or whether it's in their own zoning bylaws, to look at what might be permitted as of right. And so, what the province has suggested as a broad brush and the county has carried through is that you could have one additional residential unit in the dwelling and one in a detached accessory structure. But I think there's always going to be those cases where, who knows, maybe it makes sense to have two in the dwelling, but there's no detached residential structures, or maybe it makes sense to have, two tiny homes in the backyard, so to speak, and none in the dwelling. So, we set the broad menu, if you will, but I think there's lots of opportunity for customization at the municipal level or at the property level to look at additional. And I can think of older Victorian homes in places like Owen Sound or some of the older sections of other areas in our community where they've been divided into multiple apartments beyond the two. And I think we don't want to close the door on any of that. So I think there is opportunity there. It's just we can't necessarily spell that all out at the broad county policy level basis.
I think you got us thinking there, and I just wondered if, is what Randy was saying, and sure raised it, is maybe that's an opportunity to showcase it, to get the idea started, where you don't have to try to make a condominium type thing. We're already talked one time, I talked about having 4 in one spot and stuff, but maybe that is an opportunity as a trial run to see how well it works. And then there are builders out there of tiny homes. So I see Becky's got a hand up. Go ahead, Becky.
Yeah, thank you. I've just been sort of a fly on the wall, but it's been a really interesting discussion. But yeah, just on your comments, Councillor McQueen, it's yeah, I've been doing a little bit of thinking just about, are there small changes that municipalities can make just to their day-to-day zoning bylaw provisions that would just sort of passively facilitate the creation of more affordable housing? And there's a few options for that. A lot of municipal zoning bylaws, for example, will have a minimum dwelling size, like a minimum floor area that's permitted on certain types of lots or certain types of zones. So maybe having a review of that is a good option to start with. Like, is that something that is required? It may or may not be, but something to look at. Same with minimum lot sizes. Are there smaller lot sizes that we could consider in certain zones?
Yeah, I've talked to Randy a bit about the smaller size, or putting 4 on a smaller lot, but Grey Highlands, we removed our minimum square footage a number of years back. So we let the building code determine what that minimum size is. So yeah, good point. And we need to needs to be communicated with other municipalities as well, right?
Yeah, and there's funny things as well. Like some municipalities, for example, would historically have had provisions that limit basement dwelling units, for example. And that's kind of coming from a time when perhaps the housing stock would have been much older, and living in a cellar would have not been a desirable space. But certainly with modern housing, there's really nothing inherently wrong with a modern basement apartment, for example. But some of those historical zoning bylaw provisions tend to get carried over.
Absolutely, and thanks for that, Becky. And we've had a lot of good conversation here. The report is on the floor. Is there any other new information? There's a lot of questions where we go from here, but certainly moving forward with this report sort of gets the next step going and stuff like that. So again, that was moved by Councillor Keaveney and seconded by Councillor Burley. Any other comments? Seeing none, all in favor of that report? Okay, that's carried unanimously. Okay, well, thank you. Moving on to section 5 of our agenda then. Number 8, 14th Street Supportive Housing Verbal Update. I see Aaron's here, so popped up on the screen. So I take it, I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you. We had our kickoff meeting 2 weeks ago with the general contractor and all the trades, just to get a handle on who's doing what, when they're starting, and what's all happening. As of last week, all the asbestos abatement has been completed and all air quality testing completed now as well. Demo has started on all the interior walls. For permit and site plan approval, we resubmitted all the documents as per Owen Sound's conditions, so we're just waiting to hear back from them. And there was a couple questions regarding the permit, so we should have the permit this week. And once we receive the permit, the roof contractor is going to start right away. So things are moving quickly. We just got to get some permits and paperwork in our hands so we can move the project along. So that's the update for 396.
Okay, just don't leave this in case there are any questions then for the update. All right, so it looks promising. Everything looks good. Everything's full steam ahead.
Yep, I'm trying to push them as fast as we can. Make sure we meet our deadline.
Very good. Well, and winter's coming. Okay,
that's right.
Thanks for that update. Then, seeing there's no other comments, then okay. And then our next item for reports is notice of service users, a new Grey County Emergency Shelter and Diversion Program verbal update. I see we have there was an item on our agenda, so we would like to sort of speak to the before and after on that.
I can take that. Yeah, so we are looking at bringing in the short-term shelter program in-house. More of an update, even a week ago, a week ago when this was put on the agenda. It is actually happening before October 1st. We're having a transition of clients to Grey County this Wednesday. It's actually when it will start now. I am going to put an updated poster and some information at the council meeting this Thursday on everybody's desks, and then I can talk to it just briefly about some of the changes. So we have actually changed it to our short-term shelter program. I think that's just easier for a lot of our program participants to remember and to recognize what it is. It is basically looking at providing a housing first model when it comes to homelessness. So a housing first model is more of a recovery model. So you're looking at wrapping services around a person and providing them with housing, but with supports also. And each person that comes into the program and participates in the program will be assigned a case manager. So they will have someone that they can contact if conditions change, if something changes with them, if they're requiring something, they'll have that actual contact person that they will be able to talk with. So if a person came to us and was requiring some housing, we obviously look to, is there an opportunity for them to have housing through a family member, through a community resource that might exist already, such as the women's shelter. If not, then we would look at putting them into short-term shelter in one of our motels. We have hired a number of caseworkers, so a number of outreach workers who will then meet them at the motel the next morning or every morning that they're there and work on that housing plan for them. And by working on them, that might mean looking at what income do they have? Are they eligible for more income? Is there a existing program in the community that they may be able to access? Do they need a mental health worker? Do they need a physician? And by having it in-house, we'll have the ability of our Ontario Works caseworkers to assist, along with SOS being in this building too, so our paramedic program. So it's going to merge nicely. We'll have the ability for people to access a number of services right in-house, and we will be going out to them too. So the administration building will be a site, and also our OW satellite office in Hanover. So those are the two sites right now that will be available for people to access services. And then we will also be able to go out to other places if people require services and bring them to Hanover or Owen Sound in order to access it. We're working with our motel owners in Hanover and Owen Sound and some smaller or surrounding areas, so that we will always have places available and so that people can access. Will this work for absolutely everybody? Unfortunately, probably not. There may be some times when someone, maybe due to a safety concern or past experience, that someone may be placed on a time-limited restriction if required, especially working with some of the motel owners. Of course, if there's been some concerns in the past or currently or in the future, then there might be some repercussions for that. But of course, we would always try and rehouse someone somewhere else. We are working with a number of community resources too. CMHA is on board to provide some mental health outreach. And the 4 workers that we have hired all have mental health and addictions background and experience. So that's going to start soon, and hoping that we'll be able to provide a more coordinated access when we're looking at working with the hospitals, CMHA, Safe and Sound, the shelters. There'll be more of a you can access service wherever you might land.
Okay. And that, I'm sure there's quite a few calls that do come in.
Yeah, and 211 is going to play a great role in this too. So 211 is going to be available 24/7 to answer the phone call about anybody in Grey County that's experiencing homelessness and can direct them as to how they can receive housing or where they should go, even putting them up in a motel after hours. So it's going to work well that way.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that information. Any questions with regards to that update? Okay, well, thank you, Anne Marie. And hope it goes seamlessly, but sometimes if you change something, it takes a little while, right? Okay, so moving on then to our agenda, there's no correspondence, other business. Is there any other business for today's meeting? Okay, and it does say next meeting. I will say that this committee started in the first quarter of 2020, and we're coming to the end of our council term. And I guess the question will be, and maybe this is something that next term, like usually a task force is for a set time, but I guess there's always lots to be talked about in the sense of affordable or attainable housing, and maybe it just needs to be a committee that's always looking at it and moving forward. Because am I wrong to say that? Usually a task force is for a period of time, right? And so maybe it needs to be moved into something, or maybe that's something that needs to be changed before the next term of council to keep it going. I don't know. What's your thoughts, anyone? Randy, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. There's always somebody, right?
Had to be. Thank you for that question. And I know our clerk's department will be working on is planning to bring forward a report to at least start the discussion with this council in terms of looking at committees and task forces going forward. So and obviously having that discussion with the new council once they're up and running as well. So so that report will be coming forward in the next soon to council and committee of the whole.
So there's already some thoughts already or thinking around that, carrying it forward, or how that works.
Yeah, and we want to have obviously the thoughts from this current council in terms of what that could potentially look like, and then obviously implementing it with the new council starting in late 2022, early 2023.
Absolutely. Okay, so then it's the next date is to be determined, and there may not be another date during this term, but I guess that'll, depending on from the staff's perspective too, if there needs to be that as well.
Yeah,
And
depending on you know, if we need an update or a discussion around the 14th Street supportive housing, for example, or something that may come up, we'll of course schedule a meeting if needed. Otherwise, we'll have a discussion, I think, with all of council committee of the whole in terms of where we go forward with committee structure and task force.
Okay, well, thank you for that update.
Yeah.
Any other business? All right, I need one more motion. With all that's in and out, we had Councillor O'Leary and Warden Hicks seconding that motion. All in favor of the adjournment? That's carried, and I'll say that's 2:30. Thanks, everyone. Good meeting, and keep up the good work. And I think we've done some great work here in the last few years for sure. So all the best, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now.